about the ongoing violence in Syria that has killed hundreds, with President Bashar Assad's regime trying to squash dissent. Journalists have very limited access, but their reports, bolstered by rebels and disturbing videos posted on the internet, suggest that the city of Homs is being devastated with the heaviest bombardment since the country's uprising began in March. Joining me now, Democratic Congressman Peter Welch of Vermont, who serves on the Subcommittee on National Security, Homeland Defense, and Foreign Operations. Good morning, Congressman. Thank you for being here.
Good morning.
There's a report in Britain's Daily Telegraph this morning that says the Pentagon has started a preliminary review of U.S. military capabilities in the region. What do you think the next move should be by the U.S.?
Well, I mean, obviously all options have to be on the table. And this is an incredible tragedy, just a brutal crackdown where the citizens of Syria are being killed by Mr. Assad. He's his father's son. His father did the same thing, and it's hard to see them relenting. But in the humanitarian mission of trying to help is very important. That's a valid reason for us to be involved. But what we're lacking so far is the broad international support to make that effective. China and Russia, of course, are significant impediments. And then the third question, just in contrast to Libya, for instance, can we be involved in a limited way where we're not going to have boots on the ground and have a major commitment of U.S. military forces in Syria?
So one of the suggestions made by Senator John McCain was to consider arming the rebels. What would you think about that?
I don't necessarily think it's a good idea. I mean, it's wishing and doing are two different things. And Senator McCain is also talking about the military option. And bottom line, can it be effective? You know, in Syria, you have the Alawite regime of Mr. Assad. He's brutal. He's cracking down on his people. But the idea of arming people, and we don't know who they are, we don't know if it's a force, how do you get the arms there, how do you do that without logistics? These are all the sober, cautionary questions that have to be asked before we use a military option.
There are also reports that the White House has been talking to allies and considering delivering humanitarian aid, trying to do that. And you mentioned the devastating humanitarian crisis. We saw reports on the front page of the papers today, Doctors Without Borders, saying that this is a regime that's been withholding medicine as basically a weapon. What kind of progress is being made on that front, do you think, in terms of getting aid to the people who need it so desperately, including aid workers, by the way, who have been injured in pretty significant numbers?
Well, not enough. And, the heartache for any of us on the outside watching is that, people in Syria are suffering as a result of the brutal repression of that regime. Now, you can't fix every problem immediately. Turkey's been very generous in opening its borders for Syrians to come across and get refuge. We should continue to be involved, as Secretary Clinton is, in diplomatic efforts with Russia, particularly, and China, who, if they got their act together and stood up for human rights, could actually be somewhat influential in the Syrian regime. We should continue working in the UN, and we should continue to try to get international support to deliver humanitarian aid in any way that we can get it to those people in Syria. But bottom line, Assad eventually must go. But does it mean that we can go march in there with an army in order to make that happen without significant consequences to us? I'm not sure we can, right, at least at this point.
Congressman, can I ask you to hold on, because I want to go live to Washington, and I'll ask you about this on the other side. But this is Attorney General Eric Holder.